Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's episode, we delve into the shadowy underworld of Japan's most infamous criminal organization, the Yakuza. From their ritualistic origins to their terrifying reign over Japan's streets, this is a story of loyalty, betrayal, and a dark empire built on violence and fear. How did one of the world's most notorious syndicates rise to power? And what secrets lie behind their strict code of honor? Today we uncover a chilling tale of corruption, revenge, and a deadly conspiracy that would forever change the course of Yakuza history. On a cold night in Tokyo, a bloodied man stumbled into a convenience store, clutching a sealed envelope. His dying words were cryptic but chilling: "The dragon must burn, or the phoenix cannot rise." It would take detectives years to understand the truth behind those words, years spent unraveling a web of lies, murders, and betrayals that stretched back to the heart of the Yakuza. This is the story of the Yakuza's rise, their most brutal power struggles, and the hidden betrayal that led to their darkest hour. In the dimly lit backstreets of 17th century Edo, where the flicker of lanterns cast long shadows on the cobblestones, whispers of a new kind of underworld began to take root. These weren't the samurai, bound by honor to serve their feudal lords, nor the ronin, masterless and adrift. These were the kabuki-mono, a flamboyant and feared group of men who dressed in outlandish attire, spoke in cryptic riddles, and enforced their will with the edge of a blade. The kabuki-mono were the seeds of what would grow into the Yakuza, though their origins were far from noble. These groups began as gamblers and drifters, forming tight-knit communities bound by an unspoken code of loyalty. They were both hated and needed a paradox that would define their existence for centuries. The name Yakuza itself comes from a losing hand in a traditional Japanese card game: an 8-ya, a 9-kyu, and a 3-za. It symbolized their position in society, the ultimate outcasts. But the Yakuza's rise was anything but accidental. They flourished in the shadows, exploiting chaos and instability. As Japan transitioned through the Meiji Restoration and modernization, the Yakuza adapted, becoming enforcers, protectors, and, above all, opportunists. They thrived where law and order faltered, a dark reflection of society's unmet needs. By the mid-20th century, the Yakuza had become a force to be reckoned with. Japan, recovering from the devastation of World War II, was a land of contrasts, modern skyscrapers rising above rubble-strewn streets. In this volatile environment, the Yakuza found fertile ground to grow their empire. They stepped in where governments and corporations could not, offering loans to struggling businesses, distributing food to impoverished neighborhoods, and even rebuilding communities in the aftermath of natural disasters. But their generosity came with a price. Beneath their charitable facade was a network of extortion, smuggling, and violence. To understand their power, one must look at their structure, a rigid hierarchy that mirrored the feudal systems of old. At the top was the oyabun, or boss, a figure who demanded absolute loyalty from his subordinates, known as kobun. These relationships were solidified through elaborate initiation ceremonies, where sake was exchanged as a symbolic bond of blood. Then there were the rituals, as fascinating as they were terrifying. The most infamous of these was yubitsu, the act of cutting off one's finger to atone for a mistake. The severed digit served as both a punishment and a grim reminder of the consequences of failure. Over time, the mutilated hands of Yakuza members became a badge of dishonor, a silent testament to their violent world. The Yakuza's dual identity, criminal overlords and community guardians, made them a complex and enigmatic force. In Tokyo, they ran illegal gambling dens and drug rings while funding festivals and public works in rural areas. In Osaka, they controlled construction projects while ensuring order in the red light districts. For many, they were both villains and heroes, filling the void left by an indifferent government. This paradox was epitomized by a man named Hiroshi Fujimoto, a charismatic Oyabun who led one of the most powerful syndicates in post-war Japan. Fujimoto was a man of contradictions. On one hand, he ruthlessly eliminated rivals and expanded his territory through violence. On the other, he built schools, hospitals, and even an orphanage in his hometown, earning him the nickname the Benevolent Butcher. Fujimoto's story is not unique. It reflects a recurring theme in the Yakuza's history: their ability to straddle the line between savior and oppressor. This duality kept them in power, but it also sowed the seeds of their eventual downfall. As the Yakuza grew, so did their internal conflicts. By the 1980s, the organization was no longer a single entity but a loose federation of rival factions. Among them, none were as feared as the Dragon Seal. The Dragon Seal was an anomaly, even by Yakuza standards. Unlike other factions that adhered to a code of honor, the Dragon Seal operated with cold efficiency, prioritizing profit over tradition. They embraced modern technology, from surveillance equipment to encrypted communication, making them nearly untouchable by law enforcement. But their rise to power came with a dark undercurrent. The Dragon Seal was notorious for its brutality. Rivals didn't just disappear, they were made examples of. Bodies were found in rivers, mutilated beyond recognition, with cryptic symbols carved into their flesh. The message was clear: cross the Dragon Seal, and there would be no escape. Their leader, Kazuo Takeda, was a man shrouded in mystery. Known as the Shadow Dragon, Takeda was as cunning as he was ruthless. He rarely appeared in public, delegating his orders through a network of lieutenants. His methods were surgical, eliminating threats with precision while expanding his empire. While the Dragon Seal cemented its dominance, another faction began to rise: the Phoenix Clan. Where the Dragon Seal relied on fear, the Phoenix Clan cultivated loyalty. They positioned themselves as the true Yakuza, upholding the traditional values of honor and loyalty. The Phoenix Clan's rise was driven by a single mission: to restore the Yakuza to its former glory. But this idealistic vision masked a darker ambition. Behind closed doors, the Phoenix Clan was just as ruthless as their rivals, using their reputation as a shield for their criminal enterprises. The first cracks in the Yakuza's facade appeared in the early 1990s. Japan's economic bubble burst, plunging the country into a deep recession. With legitimate businesses struggling, the Yakuza found themselves under unprecedented scrutiny. Law enforcement, once complicit in their activities, began to crack down. Anti-Yakuza legislation made it illegal for businesses to associate with known gang members, cutting off a vital source of revenue. But the Yakuza adapted, as they always had. They diversified their operations, moving into cybercrime, stock market manipulation, and even international drug trafficking. However, these ventures came with new risks. The Yakuza's global expansion attracted the attention of foreign law enforcement agencies, further complicating their operations. By the turn of the millennium, the Yakuza was at a crossroads. Their traditional power base was eroding, and internal divisions threatened to tear them apart. The Dragon Seal and the Phoenix Clan were on a collision course, their rivalry simmering beneath a fragile truce. But the true danger lay within their own ranks. Whispers of betrayal began to circulate, fueling paranoia among the leaders. Members were accused of leaking information to the police, while others secretly defected to rival factions. Amid this chaos, a series of cryptic murders sent shockwaves through the underworld. Each victim was a high-ranking Yakuza member, and each body bore the same symbol: a dragon devouring a phoenix. The message was clear: someone was orchestrating the downfall of both factions. In a secluded temple, Kazuo Takeda meets with his inner circle to discuss the recent murders. As the meeting concludes, Takeda finds an envelope on his desk. Inside is a single photograph: his own face, with a red X drawn over it. The Dragon Seal's reign of terror had made them many enemies. But Takeda couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the work of an outsider. the betrayal he feared most was already within his walls. The Dragon Seal's grip on the underworld was tightening, but cracks were beginning to show. As the shadow of modern law enforcement loomed ever closer, the once unbreakable bonds of loyalty within the Yakuza faction started to fray. Even the streets, where the Yakuza had always ruled, began to whisper secrets of dissent. The murders had shaken both the Dragon Seal and the Phoenix clan to their core. High-ranking members, men who had once seemed untouchable, were being found mutilated in gruesome displays that no one dared to investigate openly. The dragon devouring the Phoenix accrued, bloodied mark left on each victim wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. But who was behind these killings? Neither the Dragon Seal nor the Phoenix clan admitted responsibility, each accusing the other of betrayal. Rumors began to circulate that a rogue faction, tired of the oppressive rule of both syndicates, was rising from the shadows. For the first time in decades, the Yakuza's dominance over Japan's criminal underworld was under threat not from the police, but from within. The streets of Tokyo, with their neon-soaked vibrancy and bustling crowds, were more than just a cityscape. They were a battleground. Every corner was a potential ambush, every alley a site for retribution. But for all its danger, the Yakuza thrived in this environment. They weren't just criminals, they were part of the city's very fabric. Businesses operated under their protection, clubs flourished with their blessing, and the police, wary of upsetting the delicate balance, often turned a blind eye. However, the recent murders had changed everything. Fear was palpable, even among the most hardened members. Meetings that once ended with toasts of sake now concluded with whispered warnings. Members of the Dragon Seal no longer walked the streets with the same arrogance. Even their infamous enforcers, men whose mere presence was enough to silence entire rooms, moved with caution. The first significant blow came when one of the Dragon Seal's most lucrative operations, a smuggling route that ran through Yokohama's busy port, was exposed to the authorities. This wasn't an ordinary police raid. It was precise, almost surgical. Millions of yen worth of contraband were seized, but more importantly, the identities of key operatives were revealed. Arrests followed, and with them, the intricate web of protection that had shielded the Dragon Seal began to unravel. Kazuo Takeda, the elusive leader of the Dragon Seal, was livid. For years he had built his empire on a foundation of secrecy and fear. Yet now, it seemed, someone was determined to dismantle it piece by piece. Takeda wasn't the kind of man to act rashly. Known for his calculating demeanor, he ordered a full investigation into the leaks. Trusted lieutenants were tasked with rooting out the traitors, and brutal interrogations became the order of the day. But the problem was deeper than Takeda anticipated. The arrests had emboldened rivals. Smaller gangs, long suppressed by the Dragon Seal's dominance, began to test their limits. Street-level enforcers reported skirmishes in territories that had been uncontested for years. And then there was the Phoenix clan. The Phoenix clan, always eager to position themselves as the true successors of the Yakuza's old ways, seized the opportunity to expand their influence. While the Dragon Seal scrambled to recover from its losses, the Phoenix clan moved quietly but decisively. They offered protection to businesses abandoned by the Dragon Seal and brokered alliances with smaller factions. Unlike the Dragon Seal, who ruled through fear, the Phoenix clan used charm and diplomacy to grow their network. Their leader, Kenta Mori, was the antithesis of Takeda. Where Takeda was enigmatic and reclusive, Mori was charismatic and approachable. He presented himself as a man of the people, a savior of tradition in a world increasingly driven by greed. But behind Mori's polished exterior lay a ruthless ambition. He didn't just want to restore the Yakuza's honor, he wanted to control it entirely. As the Phoenix clan gained ground, tensions between the two factions escalated. The streets of Osaka became a flashpoint, with both sides vying for control. The violence was swift and brutal, Bombs detonated in crowded markets, assassinations became commonplace, and families of Yakuza members were targeted, a line that had rarely been crossed in the past. Amid this chaos, whispers of a third force grew louder. This wasn't a rogue faction or a rebellious offshoot of the Yakuza. It was something else entirely. The first concrete evidence of this mysterious group came when a shipment belonging to the Phoenix clan disappeared en route to Nagoya. The truck's driver was found days later, his body mutilated in the same manner as the earlier victims. Carved into his chest was the dragon devouring the Phoenix. Both the Dragon Seal and the Phoenix clan initially blamed each other, but the precision of the attack raised questions. Who had the resources and audacity to target both factions? And more importantly, what was their endgame? For Kazuo Takeda, the answer became clear during a secret meeting with one of his oldest allies, a retired Kobun who had spent decades navigating the Yakuza's labyrinthine politics. Over cups of bitter green tea, the old man revealed a chilling possibility: the murders weren't the work of a rival faction, but an organized effort by disillusioned Yakuza members. These rebels, he claimed, had grown tired of the Syndicate's infighting and corruption. They believed that the Yakuza had lost their way, trading honor for profit and abandoning the communities they once swore to protect. Their goal wasn't just to weaken the Dragon Seal or the Phoenix clan, it was to dismantle the Yakuza entirely. Takeda dismissed the notion at first, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The precision of the attacks, the symbolism of the dragon devouring the Phoenix, it was a message, a call to arms for those who shared the rebels' vision. Meanwhile, Kento Mori faced his own challenges. His efforts to consolidate power within the Phoenix clan had not gone unnoticed. Several lieutenants, loyal to Mori's predecessor, openly questioned his decisions. To them, Mori's focus on diplomacy was a betrayal of the Yakuza's core identity. As mistrust grew within both factions, the shadowy rebels intensified their campaign. They targeted recruitment efforts, spreading propaganda that painted the Yakuza as relics of a bygone era. Social media, a tool the traditionalists had largely ignored, became their weapon of choice. Anonymous videos exposed Yakuza operations, and online forums buzzed with discussions of the Syndicate's declining influence. The younger generation, disillusioned by the rigid hierarchies and brutal rituals, began to defect in droves. Some joined the rebels, while others abandoned the criminal life altogether. For the first time, the Yakuza faced a threat they couldn't intimidate or outmaneuver. But the rebels weren't without their own flaws. Their message of reform and justice masked a darker reality. Internal documents, leaked by a disgruntled member, revealed plans to replace the Yakuza with their own organization, a group just as ruthless and power-hungry as the factions they sought to destroy. As the year drew to a close, the streets of Japan were gripped by an uneasy tension. The Dragon Seal and the Phoenix clan, once the unchallenged rulers of the Underworld, were now fighting a war on two fronts against each other, and against an enemy that thrived in the shadows. And in the midst of it all, Kazuo Takeda received another envelope. This time it contained not a photograph but a single line of text, written in bold red ink. The dragon and the Phoenix must both fall for the shadow to rise. It was no longer just a battle for territory or power. It was a fight for survival. The line between loyalty and treachery within the Yakuza had always been fragile. It was loyalty that bound the Dragon Seal and Phoenix clan together internally, enabling their leaders to command unquestioning obedience. But when that loyalty cracked, it could unravel empires. And now, as fear of the shadowy rebels grew, so too did the whispers of betrayal within both factions. Kazuo Takeda, the enigmatic leader of the Dragon Seal, was no stranger to paranoia. In his world, suspicion was survival. But the message he received, the ominous proclamation that both the dragon and the Phoenix must fall, planted a seed of doubt deeper than anything he had faced before. For Takeda, this wasn't just a declaration of war, it was a warning that someone within his inner circle had turned against him. Takeda acted swiftly. He ordered every member of his upper ranks to submit to questioning. The interrogations were brutal, meant not just to uncover disloyalty but to send a message Takeda would tolerate no weakness, no hesitation, yet the results were inconclusive. Every man under his command swore loyalty, enduring physical torment without breaking. If there was a traitor among them, they were skilled at hiding their true intentions. Meanwhile, the Phoenix clan faced its own turmoil. Kenta Mori, their ambitious leader, found himself fighting not only external threats but also dissent from within. A faction of older lieutenants, loyal to Mori's predecessor, began to question his leadership openly. These men viewed Mori's willingness to embrace diplomacy as a betrayal of the Yakuza's core principles. To them, Mori's approach was weak, even cowardly, especially in the face of the rebels' escalating attacks. Mori's efforts to silence his critics only added fuel to the fire. When one of the dissenters, a seasoned lieutenant named Ichiro Tanaka, was found dead in his apartment, rumors spread that Mori had ordered the hit. Though Mori denied involvement, the damage was done. The Phoenix clan, once a united front, was now splintering under the weight of its own mistrust. Amid this internal strife, the shadowy rebels continued their campaign of terror. Their attacks were surgical, designed to inflict maximum damage while leaving minimal evidence. Warehouses burned to the ground, safe houses were raided, and key operatives disappeared without a trace. Each incident was marked by the rebels' signature, the dragon devouring the phoenix. But the rebels' most audacious move came when they targeted the very heart of the Dragon Seal's operations. It was a cold winter night when the attack occurred. The Dragon Seal's headquarters, an unassuming office building in Tokyo's Shinjuku district, was considered impenetrable. Guards patrolled every floor, and the building was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. Yet somehow the rebels managed to breach it. The assault was swift and devastating. Explosives detonated on the lower floors, sending plumes of smoke into the night sky. As chaos erupted, a team of masked assailants stormed the building, neutralizing guards with precision. By the time reinforcements arrived, the rebels had vanished, leaving behind a scene of carnage. But it wasn't just the destruction that shocked Takeda. The rebels had left behind a list of named Dragon Seal members who were allegedly feeding information to their enemies. Takeda's fury was immeasurable. He ordered the immediate execution of everyone on the list, refusing to consider the possibility that it might be a ruse. Yet not all of the accused went quietly. One man, a senior lieutenant named Yuta Nakamura, managed to escape before Takeda's enforcers could apprehend him. Nakamura's flight only deepened Takeda's suspicion. For him, there was no greater crime than betrayal, and Nakamura's actions seemed to confirm his guilt. Nakamura's escape sent shockwaves through the Dragon Seal. It was unprecedented for a high-ranking member to go rogue, and his defection raised uncomfortable questions. Was Nakamura truly a traitor, or was he a scapegoat in a larger conspiracy? And if he wasn't guilty, why had he fled? As Takeda grappled with these questions, Nakamura became the most wanted man in the Underworld. The Dragon Seal deployed every resource at their disposal to track him down, but Nakamura proved to be elusive. He moved through the shadows, relying on a network of old allies and safe houses to evade capture. Meanwhile, Nakamura's defection had a ripple effect. Within the Phoenix clan, Kenta Mori began to suspect that the rebels were deliberately sowing discord among their enemies. The rebels' strategy was becoming clear. They weren't just attacking the Yakuza's infrastructure, they were dismantling its foundation of trust. Mori decided to take a calculated risk. He reached out to Nakamura, offering him sanctuary in exchange for information about the Dragon Seal. For Mori, this was more than a power play, it was a chance to gain insight into his rival's weaknesses. Nakamura, desperate and out of options, accepted Mori's offer. But his arrival at the Phoenix clan's headquarters was met with hostility. Many of Mori's lieutenants viewed Nakamura as a liability, a potential spy sent to undermine them from within. Tensions flared as arguments erupted over whether Nakamura could be trusted. Yet Nakamura's revelations were too valuable to ignore. He provided detailed accounts of the Dragon Seal's operations, exposing vulnerabilities that Mori could exploit. But he also shared something far more troubling: evidence that the rebels were infiltrating both factions. According to Nakamura, the rebels weren't just a group of disillusioned Yakuza members. They were an organized, highly disciplined force with connections to law enforcement, political figures, and even international crime syndicates. Their goal wasn't just to dismantle the Yakuza, it was to replace them entirely. This revelation sent shockwaves through the Phoenix clan. For Mori, it confirmed his worst fears. The Yakuza's greatest enemy wasn't external, it was internal. As the year drew to a close, the Yakuza's world was on the brink of collapse. The Dragon Seal and Phoenix clan, once the unchallenged rulers of Japan's underworld, were now fighting a war on two fronts against each other and against an enemy that thrived in the shadows. Yet amid the chaos, a chilling new development emerged. Several members of the Phoenix clan began to disappear under mysterious circumstances. At first, their absences were dismissed as defections or kidnappings by rival factions. But when their bodies began to surface, each bearing the rebels' signature, it became clear that the Phoenix clan was the rebels' next target. For Mori, the message was unmistakable: the Phoenix clan was no longer untouchable. His leadership was being challenged not just by his own lieutenants but by an enemy that seemed to anticipate his every move. Meanwhile, Takeda faced a similar crisis. Despite his efforts to root out traitors, the Dragon Seal continued to suffer losses. It seemed that no matter how many informants he executed, the leaks persisted. Takeda began to suspect that the rebels had infiltrated his organization at the highest levels. As both leaders, desperate to regain control, make a fateful decision, Takeda and Mori, sworn enemies, agreed to a secret meeting. For the first time in decades, the leaders of the Dragon Seal and Phoenix clans sit at the same table, united by a common goal to stop the rebels before it's too late. But even as they discuss their plans, the seeds of betrayal are already taking root. Neither Takeda nor Mori can fully trust the other, and the rebels are always one step ahead. As the meeting concludes, a lone figure watches from the shadows, a sinister smile on their lips. The game is far from over and the stakes have never been higher. The meeting between Kazuo Takeda and Kenta Mori marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Yakuza. For decades, the Dragon Seal and Phoenix clan had been bitter enemies, their rivalry shaping the very fabric of Japan's underworld. Yet now, under the threat of a shared enemy, these two formidable leaders found themselves sitting across from each other, forced to consider an unthinkable alliance. The setting for their clandestine meeting was a secluded temple on the outskirts of Kyoto. The temple, nestled deep within the forest, was a neutral ground steeped in history. Its stone walls had borne witness to centuries of conflict, serving as a sanctuary for warriors seeking peace. Now it would host two of the most powerful men in Japan's criminal hierarchy, each weighed down by desperation and distrust. Takeda arrived first, accompanied by a small entourage of his most loyal enforcers. Dressed in a tailored black suit, he exuded an air of cold authority. His sharp eyes scanned the temple grounds, searching for any sign of treachery. Though he had agreed to this meeting, Takeda harbored no illusions about Mori's intentions. In his world, alliances were temporary, trust was a weakness, and betrayal was inevitable. Mori arrived shortly after, flanked by his own bodyguards. Unlike Takeda, whose demeanor was stoic and reserved, Mori carried himself with a calculated charisma. He greeted Takeda with a polite bow, masking his weariness behind a practiced smile. Though Mori had proposed the alliance, he knew that working with Takeda would be a dangerous gamble. The meeting began with an uneasy silence. The two leaders studied each other, their eyes locking in a silent battle of wills. For a moment, It seemed as if the long-standing animosity between them would derail the conversation before it even began. But the urgency of their situation left little room for posturing. It was Mori who broke the silence. "Kazuo-san," he began, his tone measured but firm, "we are both aware of the threat we face. The rebels are not just attacking our organizations, they are dismantling the very foundation of the Yakuza. If we continue to fight each other, we will only hasten our own demise." Takeda's expression remained unreadable as he listened. He was not a man who trusted easily, but he couldn't ignore the truth in Mori's words. The rebels' attacks had been relentless, their strategy calculated and precise. Entire operations had been dismantled, key figures assassinated, and territories lost. For the first time in his career, Takeda felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. "And what do you propose?" Mori-san, Takeda asked finally, his voice low and deliberate. "A truce? An alliance? Or merely a delay in our inevitable conflict?" Mori's smile faded. "A truce, yes, but more than that, a united front. The rebels are unlike any enemy we've faced before. They are organized, disciplined, and ruthless. If we are to survive, we must combine our resources, our intelligence, and our manpower. Only then can we hope to stand against them." The proposal was as audacious as it was risky. For Takeda, the idea of working with the Phoenix clan went against everything he believed in. Yet as he considered the alternative, watching his empire crumble under the rebels' assault, he realized that he had little choice. After a long pause, Takeda nodded. "Very well," he said. "But understand this, Mori-san, I will tolerate no betrayal. If I even suspect that you are using this alliance to undermine me, I will not hesitate to destroy you." Mori met Takeda's gaze without flinching. "The feeling is mutual," he replied. With the terms of their truce established, the two leaders turned their attention to the task at hand. Over the next several hours, they shared intelligence, identifying patterns in the rebels' attacks and piecing together a profile of their enemy. What emerged was a chilling picture. The rebels weren't a disorganized group of disgruntled Yakuza members, as many had initially believed. They were a highly structured organization with a clear agenda and extensive resources. The rebels' leadership remained a mystery, but their tactics suggested military precision. Their ability to evade detection, infiltrate both factions, and execute coordinated strikes pointed to a level of sophistication that rivaled the Yakuza themselves. As the meeting drew to a close, Takeda and Mori agreed on a plan of action. They would establish a joint task force composed of trusted members from both factions to track down and eliminate the rebels. This task force would operate in secrecy, its members sworn to absolute loyalty. But even as they forged this fragile alliance, cracks began to show. The first sign of trouble came just days after the meeting. A high-ranking member of the Phoenix clan, who had been tasked with overseeing the joint task force, was found dead in his apartment. The cause of death was staged to look like a suicide, but the Phoenix clan immediately suspected foul play. Mori accused Takeda of orchestrating the murder to sabotage the alliance, a charge that Takeda vehemently denied. "Do not insult me, Mori-san," Takeda said when confronted. "If I wanted to kill one of your men, I would not hide behind such cowardly methods." Though Mori had no concrete evidence to support his accusation, the incident planted a seed of mistrust. The alliance, already tenuous, was now on shaky ground. Meanwhile, the rebels continued their campaign of terror. Their attacks grew bolder, targeting not only Yakuza operations but also public events and prominent figures. In one particularly shocking incident, a Dragon Seal lieutenant was gunned down in broad daylight while dining at a high-end restaurant in Tokyo's Ginza district. The assassination was captured on security cameras, but the assailants wore masks, making identification impossible. The brazenness of the attack sent a clear message: the rebels were no longer content to operate in the shadows. They wanted to instill fear, not just within the Yakuza, but throughout society. As the violence escalated, the joint task force struggled to make progress. Every lead seemed to end in a dead end, every informant silenced before they could reveal anything of value. It became clear that the rebels had informants of their own, feeding them information about the task force's movements. The realization that the task force had been compromised led to a wave of paranoia within both factions. Members began to turn on each other, accusing their comrades of being spies. Meetings that were once characterized by camaraderie now devolved into shouting matches and threats of violence. For Takeda and Mori, the situation was becoming untenable. The alliance they had worked so hard to build was unraveling, and the rebels showed no signs of slowing down. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Takeda and Mori agreed to a bold strategy. They would set a trap. Using false intelligence, they leaked information about a major shipment of weapons, supposedly being transported through Osaka. The hope was that the rebels would take the bait, giving the Yakuza an opportunity to strike back. The operation was meticulously planned, with both factions pooling their resources to ensure its success. The shipment was heavily guarded, and additional enforcers were stationed in the surrounding area, ready to ambush the rebels. But when the night of the operation arrived, things didn't go as planned. The rebels did indeed take the bait, attacking the convoy as expected. But they came in greater numbers than anyone had anticipated, and their firepower was overwhelming. Within minutes, the ambush turned into a massacre. Dozens of Yakuza members were killed, their bodies left as a grim testament to the rebels' strength. As news of the failed operation spread, morale within both factions plummeted. The rebels had not only outsmarted the Yakuza, but had also demonstrated their ability to strike with impunity. For many, it was the final straw. Members began to defect in droves, some joining the rebels, others simply disappearing into the night. Takeda and Mori facing the grim reality of their situation. Their alliance, once seen as a beacon of hope, had become a liability. The rebels were winning, and the Yakuza's days seemed numbered. But even in the face of defeat, Takeda and Mori refused to give up. They knew that the only way to survive was to adapt. And so, in the shadows of the ruined temple where their alliance had been forged, the two leaders began to plot their next move. Little did they know, the rebels were already one step ahead. The temple where the alliance between the Dragon Seal and the Phoenix clan was first forged now stood eerily silent. Weeks had passed since the catastrophic ambush in Osaka, and the once formidable Yakuza factions were shadows of their former selves. Betrayals, defections, and mounting losses had left both organizations teetering on the brink of collapse. For Kazuo Takeda and Kenta Mori, the stakes had never been higher. Their empires, their legacies, and their lives were all on the line. As the flames of the Osaka debacle burned in their memories, the two leaders regrouped in secrecy. Each had suffered immeasurable losses, and their mutual distrust had only deepened. Yet, they knew they had no choice but to continue their uneasy alliance. The rebels were relentless, their methods untraceable, and their motives inscrutable. If the Yakuza were to survive, Takeda and Mori needed a final gambit, one that would either break the rebels or seal their own fates. The first step was to understand their enemy. Despite their earlier failures, the alliance had managed to gather fragments of intelligence about the rebels. The information painted a disturbing picture. The rebels were not just a splinter group of disgruntled Yakuza, they were an entirely new organization, built on the ruins of those they had destroyed. Former Dragon Seal and Phoenix clan members had joined their ranks, bringing insider knowledge and resources. But what truly set the rebels apart was their leadership. At the center of it all was a figure known only as Kage the Shadow. No one had ever seen Kage's face, but their presence loomed over every attack, every betrayal, and every calculated strike. The rebels spoke of Kage with reverence, describing them as a visionary determined to dismantle the old order and build something new. Takeda and Mori realized that to defeat the rebels, they needed to eliminate Kage. The search for Kage became the Alliance's top priority. Both factions mobilized their remaining resources, deploying spies, informants, and hackers to track down any trace of the elusive leader. It was a monumental task. Kage operated with military precision, using proxies and encrypted communications to conceal their identity. Weeks turned into months, and the Alliance grew increasingly desperate. But then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the Alliance's informants, a low-level fixer who had worked with both factions, claimed to have overheard a conversation between two rebel operatives. According to the informant, the rebels were planning a major operation in Tokyo. The target was unclear, but the timing was precise. The attack would coincide with the city's annual Winter Festival, a high-profile event attended by government officials, business leaders, and thousands of civilians. For Takeda and Mori, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. If they could intercept the rebels and capture Kage, they might finally turn the tide of the war. But the plan was fraught with risks. The rebels were unpredictable, and any misstep could lead to another disaster. Still, the leaders agreed to move forward. The plan was simple in theory but complex in execution. Takeda and Mori would use the festival as bait, planting false intelligence to lure the rebels into a trap. They would deploy their remaining forces around key locations, creating a perimeter that would allow them to isolate and capture Kage. To ensure secrecy, the operation was limited to a small circle of trusted operatives. As the festival approached, tension within the Alliance reached a breaking point. Paranoia ran rampant, fueled by the fear of another betrayal. Takeda and Mori held their final strategy meeting in a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by their most loyal lieutenants. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency planned for. Yet, despite their preparations, an air of uncertainty hung over the room. "This is our last chance," Mori said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "If we fail here, there will be no coming back." Takeda nodded grimly. Failure is not an option. The night of the Winter Festival arrived, and Tokyo glittered with lights and festivities. Crowds gathered in the city's streets, their laughter and chatter masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. Hidden among the revelers were dozens of Yakuza operatives, disguised in plain clothes. They watched the crowds with hawk-like vigilance, scanning for any sign of the rebels. For hours, nothing happened. The festival unfolded without incident, and Takeda and Mori began to wonder if their plan had been compromised. But just as doubt began to creep in, the first explosion rocked the city. A fireball erupted near a parade float, sending panicked crowds fleeing in every direction. Chaos consumed the streets as more explosions followed, each one strategically timed to create maximum confusion. Amid the mayhem, masked figures emerged from the shadows, wielding weapons and shouting orders. The rebels had arrived. Takeda and Mori acted swiftly, mobilizing their forces to counter the attack. Gunfire erupted in the streets as Yakuza operatives clashed with rebel fighters. The battle was fierce and chaotic, with civilians caught in the crossfire. But despite the overwhelming violence, Takeda and Mori remained focused on their primary objective, capturing Kage. According to their informant, Kage would be overseeing the operation from a nearby high-rise building. Takeda and Mori led a team of elite enforcers to the location, fighting their way through waves of rebels. The high-rise was heavily guarded, its entrances barricaded and patrolled. But the Yakuza were relentless, breaking through the defenses floor by floor. Finally, they reached the top floor, a luxurious penthouse that had been converted into a command center. As Takeda and Mori entered, they were met with an eerie silence. The room was empty, save for a single figure standing by the window, their back turned to the door. "Kage," Takeda said, his voice cold and steady. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that neither Takeda nor Mori expected. It was Yuta Nakamura, the former Dragon Seal lieutenant who had fled months earlier. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Nakamura, once a trusted member of the Dragon Seal, had not just defected to the rebels, he had been leading them all along. "You look surprised," Nakamura said, his tone calm and unrepentant. "Did you really think the old ways could survive forever?" Takeda's eyes narrowed with fury. "You betrayed your family, your brothers. You will die for this." Nakamura shook his head. "No, Kazuo. I didn't betray the Yakuza, I freed it. The world has changed, but you refuse to change with it. The rebels aren't just dismantling the old order, we're building something stronger, something that will endure." Mori stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. "And how many lives have you destroyed in the process? How many innocent people have died for your so-called vision?" "Innocence is a myth," Nakamura replied. "Everyone is complicit in this system. I'm simply giving them a choice: adapt or perish." The confrontation escalated into a brutal fight. Nakamura, despite his rhetoric, was no mere strategist, he was a skilled fighter, honed by years in the Yakuza. He moved with precision and speed, matching Takeda and Mori blow for blow. The penthouse became a battleground, the clash of steel echoing through the air. Takeda fought with the ferocity of a cornered tiger, his strikes fueled by rage and betrayal. Mori, ever the tactician, targeted Nakamura's weaknesses, exploiting every opening. But Nakamura held his ground, his movements driven by a fervent belief in his cause. The fight reached its climax when Mori, with a final calculated strike, disarmed Nakamura. Takeda seized the opportunity, delivering a fatal blow that left Nakamura crumpled on the floor. As Nakamura took his final breaths, he looked up at Takeda and Mori with a defiant smile. "You can kill me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But you can't stop the future." With Nakamura's death, the rebel forces began to splinter. Leaderless and demoralized, many surrendered or fled, their campaign of terror brought to an abrupt end. The Yakuza alliance, though battered and bloodied, had achieved a hard-fought victory. But the cost was immeasurable. Hundreds of lives had been lost, and the once mighty Yakuza factions were left in ruins. Takeda and Mori parted ways after the battle, their alliance dissolving as quickly as it had formed. Though they had survived the rebels' onslaught, they both knew that their empires would never be the same. For Takeda, the betrayal of Nakamura was a wound that would never heal. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of loyalty, even among family. For Mori, the war had been a lesson in the dangers of ambition. He had fought to protect his legacy, only to realize that the cost of power was far greater than he had ever imagined. As the winter festival's fires died down, a new era began for the Yakuza. The old ways had been tested and found wanting, and the shadow of rebellion would linger for years to come. But in the ashes of destruction, a question remained: had the rebels truly been defeated? Or had Nakamura's vision planted the seeds of a revolution yet to come? Thank you for joining us on Mystery Minds. If you enjoyed unraveling today's dark tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What do you think about the Yakuza's secretive world? Let us know in the comments below. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and until next time, keep questioning the world around you.